It has now been almost 2 months since the fatal shooting of Alex Preddy, an incident that came hot on the heels of ICE's comparably contentious encounter with Renee Good. Regardless of how one views their deaths, whether as cold-blooded executions at the hands of trigger-happy federal agents, or as justified responses to the actions of dangerously propagandized protesters, within much of the left, these were immediately hailed as a cultural and political watershed, the moment at which their deeply entrenched convictions ripened into society-upending consensus. Of course, this is far from the first such claim to have been made by liberals. In the decade since 2016, the year America's long-simmering tensions finally bubbled to the surface, we have heard these same voices declare everything from the overturning of Roe v. Wade to the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, the seismic non-events of January 6th, and the fentanyl-assisted killing of George Floyd, to constitute nothing less than a civilizational tipping point, the media all too eager to hand them the megaphone. Not that such absolutist language has been exclusive to progressives. Perhaps the most explicit example came in the wake of the Charlie Kirk assassination, which many conservatives believed would compel the country to at last confront the full scale of leftist extremism, while just weeks earlier, the senseless yet entirely predictable murder of Irina Zarutska was heralded, rather optimistically, as a collective wake-up call to the reality of black-on-white violence. Admittedly, not all such assertions have been quite so anticlimactic. Indeed, the closest we have come to a genuine rupture unfolded throughout the COVID coup, the dehumanizing indignity of masks and the grinding confinement of lockdowns, prompting vast swathes of the population to reassess the true nature of the government corporate hegemon. In practice, however, now some 6 years on, even this has fizzled out into a series of purely personal awakenings, structural and administrative continuity having quietly reasserted itself beneath a veil of denial, obfuscation, blame-shifting, and near wholesale amnesia. History, by contrast, has typically proved far more decisive. Against a backdrop of inflation, hunger, and political paralysis, Parisian citizens storming of the Bastille in 1789 demonstrated both a reorientation toward popular sovereignty and the impotence of France's Bourbon monarchy, the last vestiges of Louis XVI's reign evaporating 2 years later with his failed flight to Varennes. In Tsarist Russia, peasant strikes and bread riots had been frequent occurrences prior to 1917, but only became determinative when, in the midst of the February Revolution, soldiers refused Nicholas II's orders to fire on crowds, creating a power vacuum that would ultimately be filled by the Bolsheviks. The US has endured more than a few reckonings of its own. In the build-up to the Civil War, the Union had been held together through little more than containment, compromise, and the steadfast deferral of consequences. But with the Confederate attack on Fort Sumter, ambiguity was rendered untenable, every state and individual forced to pick sides. These historical inflection points, along with countless others like them, were notable for more than their intensity alone. They marked thresholds of irreversibility that washed away the assumptions of the preceding age, alongside the institutional foundations on which they had rested. For all our modern hyperbole, contemporary crises seldom yield such cut-and-dried conclusions. With the emergence of each fresh outrage, most often an allegation of police brutality, the familiar machinery whirs into motion, casting this isolated or as yet unclear incident as a definitive repudiation of the system as a whole. When these episodes can be framed in such a way as to serve elite interests, they invariably become the subject of media saturation, as well as an ensuing wave of protests. These same elites allowing the initial fervour to grant some measure of catharsis, before presenting their power-consolidating response as a virtuous and long overdue concession. If, on the other hand, the incident cannot be leveraged, responsibilities dispersed across agencies, jurisdictions, and protracted legal processes, time itself deployed as an instrument of stabilization. In the most sensitive cases, coverage is minimized or shut down altogether, quarantined within ideological echo chambers, where it is portrayed as evidence of further radicalization, necessitating swift and assertive intervention. Either way, rather than unraveling, the system absorbs a shock and, where possible, harnesses it towards its own ends, thereby solidifying control by elevating the ambient level of pressure. This approach is not without considerable risk. Nevertheless, even if such mechanisms were to fail, there exists no unifying principle, whether in America or elsewhere throughout the Western world, around which dissent might congeal, each new outbreak of political violence or high-profile killing being instantly interpreted through conflicting ethical and conceptual frameworks. Under these conditions, revolutionary impulses persist, but with neither the requisite direction nor alignment to be realized. Frustrations erupting, often dramatically, yet never along a single fault line capable of fracturing the dominant power structure. This uneasy interlude is sometimes referred to as an interregnum, a period in which the old order no longer commands belief, yet survives solely on the basis that no successor has emerged to replace it. By now, the moral legitimacy, institutional authority, and shared mythologies of the post-World War II era have all visibly decayed, even while its governing apparatus remains firmly entrenched, administering a world it no longer convincingly explains, let alone credibly represents. The incoming paradigm, meanwhile, is still contested and hopelessly ill-defined, each successive convulsion lowering the bar for indignation and, by extension, ensuring both the inevitability and the acceleration of the next. As the Italian Marxist Antonio Gramsci observed from his prison cell, the crisis consists precisely in the fact that the old is dying and the new cannot be born. In this interregnum, a great variety of morbid symptoms appear, adding, in what has become his most oft-cited warning, now is the time of monsters. While there are few watching this video who would agree with Gramsci's solution, namely the construction of a socialist counter-hegemony, there are surely fewer still who could deny that our current predicament has produced more than its fair share of these. Although heavily redacted and mired in online distortion, the revelations surrounding Jeffrey Epstein leave little doubt that a sizable segment of the ruling class is engaged in, or at least entangled with, a form of depravity that, by any historical standard, should have ignited a fury comparable to anything in 18th century France or late imperial Russia. Yet no such reaction has proved forthcoming. Aside from Ghislaine Maxwell, who today enjoys custom-made meals and unlimited toilet paper privileges in her low-security Texas prison, no senior political, financial, or cultural figure has faced any punishment worthy of the name, with the meagre fraction who have faced reputational consequences confined to a handful of expendables such as Prince Andrew and Peter Mandelson. Even the backlash which has been provoked has come along predictably partisan lines, each camp emphasising the offences of its enemies, while downplaying those of its allies. As more details continue to surface, it has grown increasingly clear that these will likely be processed in much the same manner as so many scandals before, delayed, deflected, debated, and eventually metabolized. If a regime can weather the disclosure of crimes as nakedly barbaric as those committed on Middle St. James Island, then it becomes difficult to envisage a transgression intolerable enough, be it a slain anti-ICE activist or a murdered right-wing pundit, to jolt the populace from its passivity. None of this is intended as an invitation to despair, much less a warrant for our acquiescence. Rather, it is an acknowledgement that amid this ongoing interregnum, the notion of a moral red line no longer applies, leaving us not with the question of what level of exposure might finally bring down such an edifice, but whether collapse is even conceivable for a structure that requires neither belief nor legitimacy in order to endure. Hi everyone, and thanks an awful lot for watching. If you enjoyed this video, I'd really appreciate if you could give it a like or a share. I can't tell you how much that helps. Well, if you're interested in seeing others like it, please consider hitting the subscribe button. Alternatively, you can always find more of my written work over on Substack, the link for which is in the description. Thanks again for your time.